Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about the new movie, Medieval. Movies that are based in this time period are really interesting to me, and the fact that this one is based on a true story made me really want to go watch it. So without further ado, let's get into the 6 things that make a movie great. 1. The plot. Upon looking at the synopsis of this film, I guess it's supposed to be about the story of Jan Žižka, played by Ben Foster, and how he rose to become a famous military commander. But that's not at all what this movie lends itself to. It's hard to explain because a lot of this movie is convoluted, but essentially Žižka and his crew are mercenaries who get involved with political affairs. A woman is promised to be married to a lord, but that lord is super corrupt. Žižka and his crew fight the evil and try to stop the corruption for the greater good, yada yada yada. And while it seemed like this movie pretty much had a home run lined up, they swung and missed horribly. It's pretty clear that whatever parts of the story that are true behind the making of this movie, that is really interesting. This movie was not very interesting. And I think it has a lot to do with the way that this movie was directed. The story was extremely scattered and at times disorienting, to where any semblance of a good story kind of just got lost in the midst of action sequences and meaningless monologuing. Which is really disappointing because there were several flashes of a good story in this movie, but none of it really came to fruition. Not to mention the fact that there is exposition dumping at the beginning of this movie and at the end of this movie, that if it would have been shown on screen instead of all that we got, it would have made the movie a lot more interesting. And this movie plays a card from the gray, which you most certainly shouldn't do unless it's to tell you what not to do when making a movie. So regardless of how much of this story is true, the way that it was shown on screen was very poor. So I have to give plot a thumbs down. 2 is family friendliness. This movie has minimal profanity, but that's not what drives it to not be family friendly. What puts it there is graphic violence, blood and gore, and 2 scenes of female nudity. There's a sexual scene and then there's a very brief scene showing rape. But the nudity in this movie was completely unnecessary. All that to say, family friendliness gets a thumbs down. 3 is acting and script. While this movie had a lot of good actors in it, they were doing everything they could to make this movie better while working with what was a terrible script. Ben Foster, Michael Caine, Matthew Goode are all great actors, but the scripts they were given were so bad that their performances seemed really bland. I really liked Sophie Lowe as Catherine, but again, her script was not that great either.
There were also multiple parts in this movie where it's pretty clear that they messed up the scene, and instead of reshooting it, they just had the lines of dialogue over the actor's moving mouth, even though it wasn't what the mouth was saying. This happened multiple times throughout the film, but mostly with Michael Caine's character. My guess is that they didn't get exactly what they wanted in hindsight, and because they didn't have the money to fly him back out for a reshoot, they just had him send in some audio, which really just made this film feel even cheaper than it was.
So while I believe that these actors were doing their best to carry this film, you can only carry it so far with a bad script. And in this case, it wasn't very far. So acting and script get a thumbs down. 4 is character development. Unfortunately, there's almost no character development in this movie. This movie is supposed to be about Žižka, and I couldn't have even told you that after the film. What little character development he did have came way too late in the movie. Like, there were multiple times where there seemed to be some sort of development between Žižka and Catherine, which is kind of what I thought this movie was going to be about, but instead of developing their relationship earlier on in the film when they could have, they waited way too late for it to even mean anything. Like, I'm talking the last 20 minutes of the movie, to the point where you don't really feel anything for any of these characters, and what love relationship there could be between Žižka and Catherine seems really forced and awkward. There definitely could have been a dynamic between Žižka and his men that could have been something like King Arthur, where you got to know each of the men and they had some sort of personality developed into the film, but that's not the case. You forget who his men are and what their names are, and all the twists and turns that end up happening in the film that are based around these characters don't hit home because they're not developed enough for you to care about anything. It was done really badly, and the character development gets a huge thumbs down. 5 is visuals and CGI. I really enjoyed some of the things that the fight scenes in this movie had to offer. There was brutal attention to detail involved in the fight sequences, and in a movie like this that wants to take on that darker, more realistic tone, I think they did a good job. That being said, I don't care what kind of budget this movie had, it definitely should have used single continuous shots, but instead, they used about 10,000 1,000 jump cuts, to the point where any of the good that could come from the fight sequences or the visuals in this movie were undercut by how many times they switched camera angles and how fast they clipped everything. That was part of the reason why this movie seemed disorienting, is because during the fight scenes you have no idea what's going on, which is disappointing because they had some good things going for them in this category. So visual and CGI for me get a 50-50. And 6 is rewatchability. Regardless of how much I enjoy movies that take place in this time period and how much I like movies that are based on true stories, the word that came to me after this film about how I could describe it was blurry. And to put it plainly, the storytelling is just so poor that the film is not very enjoyable. So rewatchability for me gets a thumbs down. With all these areas considered, I have to give Medieval a 4.5 out of 10. This movie had a great cast, some good acting performances, some brutal visuals, and a storyline that could have been very interesting had it been put together better. But it was buried underneath really choppy scenes, a plethora of jump cuts, and overall just bad directing. I really would have liked to see this movie be directed by someone with a bit more experience, someone like Ridley Scott or Wolfgang, because this kind of movie is right up their alley. With that being said, I would not waste your time or money going to see this movie in theaters. Stick to the classics that you know are good, like Troy, Gladiator, Tristan and Isolde, and King Arthur. Thank you so much for watching. If you've seen Medieval, please let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. As always, I appreciate your love and support, and I'll catch you guys and gals in the next one.